Good evening and welcome to Athens City Council. It's Monday, April 25th, 2022. The time is 7 p.m. We're in committee meetings tonight. We have several presentations in each of these committees. So we'll begin with Finance and Personnel. That's chaired by Councilmember Crowell and joined by Council members Reisner, Ziff, and Spjeldness. Yep. Which, yeah, would be much easier.
Thank you, President Isley. The first item on the Finance and Personnel Committee agenda tonight, fine and fee justice for the municipal court. We will be hearing from Judge Grace here. Judge Grace and Mayor Patterson attended a conference, a boot camp in Phoenix, Arizona earlier this spring, the Cities and Counties for Fine and Fee Justice Boot Camp. And there's a very interesting proposal for social and economic equality as it relates to fees and fines in the court system. I believe Judge Grace will be looking for council to support a program with a council resolution. And I believe that there's a partial grant possibly available for a study, and that there will be 5 cities selected across the United States for this. But Judge Grace is here tonight to speak to us. Please, Judge.
Thank you, Councilmember Crowell. Thank you, President Isley, remaining members of council, for having me in here today to speak. And so in early March, the mayor and I attended the Cities and Counties for Fine, Fee, and Justice. It's a coalition of local governments working to ensure that fees do not place a disproportionate burden on low-income residents. This seemed like something that really meshed well with the ideals of Athens as a city, and I thought that it was worthwhile to attend it. We were encouraged by Chief Justice O'Connor to attend, and there was some funding so that the travel expenses were all paid, not by the city. So we attended, and I think that, and I'll let the mayor address anything he wants to address out of that as well, but I think there was a lot of very important information that was shared through this, and there is an opportunity for us to apply to be one of the 5 cities from around the nation. It's only 5. There's no guarantee we'll get selected for this, but there are some reasons why I think we might be an appealing option for the coalition anyway. But this would be an opportunity to join a progressive group that's actively looking for ways to make court systems to be as equitable as possible for all people coming through the court system. It gives us as a community an opportunity to be a leader and to look for ways, try out various solutions, see what works, what doesn't, and then try to be a model for other communities to enact change of this nature. It will connect us with resources. There is the grant option that you had mentioned. It will range somewhere from $25,000 to $75,000 is what they have available for the cohort this year. So what we're talking about, and what I think Member Crowell will be able to introduce next week, is a resolution in support of the efforts to investigate ways to make the court costs, and this is not about fines or other penalties. There are 2 different aspects to what courts do. There are penalty components, and that is discretionary. The courts have to look at what is appropriate for each and every person that comes before the court. That would obviously need to continue. That's part of what courts do. But part of what happens is an administrative cost, and that is not discretionary. It is set, well, there's some discretion to it. Mostly it is set as a flat fee on every case, regardless of type, regardless of severity, regardless of what their background or their financial situation is. And the idea of this cohort is to look at that as something that may have disproportionate impact or unequal impact for the people that are coming before the court system, and to investigate whether or not there are ways to make it more equitable. So joining the cohort is not a specific commitment. We are not necessarily bound to do any one thing except investigate and try to find ways to make it more equitable. My understanding from Administrative Director Stephanie Hess at the Ohio Supreme Court is that the Chief Justice would also write a letter of support for this particular community to join the cohort, and I think that having something from City Council as a resolution of support would be a nice addition to the application process that we're going through. I don't think that the City of Athens is situated right now to take on all of the costs of the court. I'm not planning to ask that of anyone in the city. But I think there are a lot of things that we can do around the people that are most heavily impacted, that we can and realistically should be looking at those. And some of that will happen regardless of the cohort. Some of it's already begun. But being a part of the cohort gives us a chance to be tied in with other people of like minds and to be, as I said, a leader to address this, not only here, but try to, again, set that model for other communities around the nation. So I would encourage council members to support the resolution that Member Crowell will be introducing next week. I don't know if the mayor wants to add anything to that presentation about the Fines and Fees Justice Committee.
Just to add, and I think I may have shared this with council in the past, that it was a real eye-opening experience to attend the conference and see what other cities have been doing or plan to do. The charter cohort was 10, and as I was sitting there and listening to all these great things, it was coming from St. Paul, Minnesota, San Francisco, coming from Phoenix, Arizona. It was coming from a lot of large cities. And so at one point I spoke up in day 2 of the 2-day conference and basically raised my hand and said, you know, what's the likelihood that a city of 23,849 people would be selected in the cohort, or what are our chances? And they said that, you know, they weigh all these applications equally, you know, to go through a year-long training process, basically. And then after that session was over, I was approached by a former judge who was part of the one of the organizations that put this event on, and strongly encouraged Judge Grace and I to go ahead and apply for this. The other beauty I see in this is that, you know, if we are selected, to go through a year-long process and bringing in nonprofits, bringing in other legal services here in the city of Athens and possibly Athens County, you know, to really take that deep dive into the inequities when it comes to fines, and most importantly, fees, the fee structure behind the legal system, and how that in some cases, in some cities, as the judge and I were sitting there and listening, thinking, there are, you know, jails and prison systems that have basically built themselves upon the fees, not just the fines, but subsidizing, you know, the system that way. And when I'm listening to this and thinking about, you know, inequities, you know, to put that on the back of individuals that are struggling to begin with. And then, you know, the topic also came up about, you know, restitution, and that restitution has a place, but watching people come out of the prison system and right away have to be paying, and they may not even have jobs yet, or are struggling to get back into society and functioning as someone who is making a living, so that they can pay that, and it just becomes this real, I don't want to say interesting, this vicious cycle that is the system. So anyway, you know, again, I too am in favor of at least putting forward a resolution to see if we might be successful in being one of the second round cities. And as the judge indicated, it's gone from 10 to 5. But you know, I'd certainly like to see Athens become one of the 5 cities in that cohort.
This very much seemed like something in line with the ideals, the priorities that we as a city have discussed many different times. And as I was sitting there, as the mayor was sitting there, every time we would have a presentation, we'd turn to each other and talk about it a little bit, and it really seemed to fit very well, very nicely with what our city tries to do and tries to be. So that's what we're asking. It's just a resolution in support of the application and of the process of looking at ways to reduce those inequities. Thank you again.
One question for either of you. The application, is that a process that the courts finalizes, or is that in conjunction with the mayor's office? How is that done?
So what we'll actually be doing, we've started the process already, it's been submitted, and it's due by May 22nd is the final application. And this is one of the pieces I wanted to, after you had suggested the resolution as an option, I wanted to go ahead and get this in place, and then we've started talking with some of the other community members as well. the application is specifically looking for that community engagement. And that's something that we're working to try to put together as a way of showing that this is not just two people, that this is the community. And I think it is, but that's what we're working on right now, is to get that ready. The basic part of the application is already submitted, but they are looking for that engagement before we submit the final application by May 22nd.
Great, thank you, Judge.
I guess I'll stay here in case anybody else has
Yeah,
questions.
and other questions from the committee for Judge Grace? Yes, Mr. Reisner.
Have either one of you thought about approaching the county commissioners or the sheriff's department to get their feedback? After all, our municipal court does serve the county, and to have their support, I think, would be significant.
That is something I wanted to do after this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the starting point because of where the funding authority is, where the obligations are. I think this is the place to start, but I want them to be a part of it as well. And actually, the mayor mentioned this, getting people within the county, not just the city, involved is a priority. This is not something that it should not be done unilaterally. It should be done as a community, and community broadly speaking, not just the city, not just the elected officials, but as much as possible to engage other individuals that have a role, that are impacted. I've started some conversations with legal services. I've started conversations with other individuals who have leadership roles in the community to get feedback from them and to ask them, once we are ready, to put together a more formal working group if they'd be interested. The responses have been fantastic.
Member Spelnis.
Yes, when I saw this, I was so excited, I can't begin to tell you. This is all about the research that I was doing when I was at Ohio University. Criminal justice reentry. What do we do to help get these guys back on track? And so many of the things that we found in looking at reentry barriers throughout Southeast Ohio and around the state had to do with many of the issues that are raised here. So I said, I personally will do whatever I can to help and support this. I mean, just one of the many issues, because I could go on, because I have, is that, okay, so somebody comes out of prison or they've been fined for something, and they don't pay it because they can't afford it, because they can't find a job, and they lose their driver's license. Okay, you lose your driver's license, and then you can't pay the fine because you can't keep your job, or you drive on a suspended license, and then you get in more trouble. So it's this continual spiral downhill until you are completely lost, and what happens? You may end up in jail again, or certainly not be in a good place. That's just one of many examples, and there's so many more. But anyway, there's just one example. So I am all about this, and thank you so much for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you, everyone.
Other members of council? Yes, Member Swank.
Over the last several years, the city in general and this city council in particular has addressed equity in a lot of different forms. Just this coming Wednesday, this council will participate in the racial equity training from 9 to noon. Last week, we passed a trash ordinance, of all things, that equalized what renters and homeowners will pay for one can of trash. I don't have the depth or breadth of experience as Solveig. However, I would ask this question: can you give us an example or two currently of inequities that you are seeing here in Athens through your court, or through the judicial process, I should say?
Certainly. So one of the issues that we addressed at the conference ties in as a good answer to what you're asking about. And that is, it's very common to have supervision fees when you are placed on a reporting probation. And those supervision fees are to cover the expenses of having a probation officer, to have the monitoring, whatever other elements are going to be included depending on the nature of the supervision. And I have a specialized docket, 2 of them. And there are supervision fees for one of those programs that were built in when it was initially created. And it's $360. Generally, they're expected to be in the program for a year, and that means $360. I have routinely seen people come through the court system in that program who do well on supervision, they do well with their abstinence, they do well with their counseling, they're doing well. But they're really struggling with the finances. And it was delaying some of those resolutions of their cases, so they stayed in the program longer. That's not necessarily bad. Sometimes that additional time in the program can be good for people. It's additional supervision and just check in so that they know what's going on. But it also undermines their sense of accomplishment from being in the program. So I've already made this change. I started, for every month that people have successful participation in the program, I'm giving them a $30 credit towards those supervision fees, so they're not required to pay it. Before doing that, I asked for some numbers and I looked at how much it was collecting for the supervision fees. Over the past 5 years, we collected no more, not even $5,000 in any given year in supervision fees. It's not much in terms of what our operating expenses are, or what the court and the city has to pay. But it was making a difference for those individuals. So I made it possible for them to earn, so they have a responsibility on this, but for them to earn that to be forgiven so that they can graduate, so that they can see that as hopefully what I want it to be, which is another way of showing that they've been successful in their program. There are other things like that, but that's an example.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, Member McCary.
Thank you. I'm enthusiastic about this work and appreciate the thought that's going into it. I'm also appreciative of the careful kind of coalition building that I'm hearing happening in terms of your plans to expand to other entities in the county. And I've been in situations where I've pursued opportunities like this and then had the disappointment of not being awarded them. So I'm wondering if you can think of anything we might be able to do to support the likelihood that we will pursue these topics regardless of whether or not we are awarded this opportunity.
So part of the reason I wanted to go ahead and start making some of these changes once we had the information, once we came back from the conference, is I don't want this to peter out. I don't want this to be something that we base it all on whether or not we're selected as part of the cohort. The cohort is nice. It's something I think that would be good for all the reasons I outlined earlier. It's not the reason to make the change. The reason to make the change is because of the impact on the people that are coming through the court system. So I'm already working on that, and the court has a lot of ability to make these changes. But what I'm wanting right now is to see if the community shares those goals, shares that priority, and is interested in a conversation and engaging in the process.
So then I just want to ask for clarification, and this might be for Councilmember Crowell, but would the resolution specifically speak to this opportunity and our support of it, or more broadly to our interest in pursuing these issues as a community?
I believe, I haven't seen a draft of the resolution yet, or drafted a resolution yet. I believe it would be specifically in support of this application, but we can do other things to support the other programs the judge is talking about and doing it internally. But this specifically is to support the application.
And when I spoke with Clerk Walker about this, there was some conversation about it being more broad. I don't know what the final version will look like yet. I don't write the resolution. But I think this is something that really is in line with our city goals. And I would be happy to see any resolution that is making it clear that that is a shared goal.
Other questions for Judge Grace? Okay, thank you, Judge. Moving on to our next item, also yes, I'm sorry.
Can I comment?
Please, Auditor.
Not a question, though, you asked for questions. Well, I'm gonna be the only naysayer in the room as the auditor. And let me preface this by saying that my bachelor's degree is in criminal justice. And when I first moved here, I worked for Hocking, Athens, and Perry Community Action all over all 3 counties for 5 years. And I understand the situations that people live in outside of the city of Athens in this area. However, as the auditor, my understanding from our original conversations was that we're talking about court costs, which is the main source of revenue for the municipal court program. The city already subsidizes that program, and we are up now to over $400,000 that we pay over and above what they bring in each year. Their budget's over $1 million. The court costs last year were about $460,000. The other fines and fees that come in are about $200,000. So from my standpoint, I'm in support of this, but I have two things I'd like to point out. If we're not serious about moving forward, I'd be really surprised if we would find outside sources to subsidize $500,000 a year for court operations, even if we do get some help. And I'm also a little bit uncomfortable with moving forward. And I had said that, this is the option is to move forward, see if we even get it, this grant, and move forward with looking into this. However, if we're not going to follow through and we're not going to be willing to give up $500,000 a year in our general fund to support the court, then we probably shouldn't even move forward. Now, I know that's not going to happen. I mean, I know everybody thinks we should go ahead and try for this and see what happens, see if we even get it. If we do, they do the study, and then what do they find out? Do we have any support for this program? The amount of money that we are subsidizing in the municipal court program from the general fund has increased. It increases every year, and what they bring in is doesn't cover it, and some of that is okay, but in the past we've had many conversations here, even before Judge Grace came into the office, about how much is too much, how much are we paying and subsidizing. And but as I said, I know how people live, I know how hard it is, but I also know that these people are in court for a reason. They did something they shouldn't do. As Solveig said, I was just watching tonight about, reentry programs and things like that. I get it, and I support that stuff, but financially, council has to be ready to back that up. And that's a lot of money. We're not talking about the $100 and some thousand in fines, court fines. We're talking about the $460,000 in costs that we would be losing if we went through with the purpose of this program. Solveig, did you?
Oh. Let Judge Grace talk.
I think there's a microphone there. Should I stand close to that?
You should, so that
Okay.
the viewing audience
Just that
can hear.
this is something that we've talked about as not the immediate move that we're discussing, and it's not something that I'm proposing. I tried to mention that earlier, that I don't think the city's situated to take on all of that cost. We're looking at ways to minimize the impact, not to completely change the structure. It's not that she's making that up. That's something that I had mentioned. I don't like the way that courts anywhere are funded, where it's funded by the people that go through the court system. And so I think she's responding more to that personal belief of mine, not to what I'm proposing for us as we go through this process.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Please,
Well, I
Member
should say, we've
Spillins.
had this conversation in meetings where you're the one that mentioned $500,000 that would be lost. And I said, well, it was only $460,000 last year. So you did talk about that loss, and it's a lot of money in our general fund. And as the auditor, I just have to put that out there. If we don't get any kind of other support, I think council has to be willing to make other adjustments in the court budget to account for that.
Let me just first apologize to the auditor for not calling on her earlier, but that we appreciate the financial analysis. It's an important part of this whole process. Member
It is,
Spillins?
thank you.
Okay, and yes, what you're saying, of course, is important, that we have to keep, and I share Judge Grace's ideas about how these things should be funded, but that's not a reality. However, I think it's really important that some of these things aren't really about adding costs at all. And some of these, based on cost-benefit analyses that I've personally been involved with, by providing good reentry and sensible programs, it reduces recidivism, it reduces crime, and so therefore costs the courts less. So I think that's the kind of smart activity that we have to be considering, because it assumes now that costs will continue to go up. If we're smart, if we handle things better, they won't. Or at least We hope they won't, but I really would say that there's some smart ways of dealing this that could conceivably reduce costs rather than adding to them. But yes, we do have to take into consideration how the court works.
President Isley.
So just to give a broad brushstroke of our conversation tonight, which we've now been discussing for 22 minutes, and I am going to be a timekeeper because we have at the end of our session, we have another presentation, and I want to be able to give them equal time. I think this is a good first discussion. If I'm sensing, I see general support of a letter of support towards submitting the grant. But I could think caution based on Auditor Heck's comments and earlier comments, and acknowledging, Solveig, there are ways to perhaps save costs. But this is for elimination of court costs. And to be very, I think, but what I would suggest is, I don't think we have to settle this tonight, and that there are a number of ways. I hear what you're saying. There are a number of ways that we can advance more equitable situation. And so I think long-term, best case scenario, you submit, we offer the letter of resolution, you get the grant, but then there need to be probably some serious conversations about what the financial implications are and a working group to help to assist with this so that we're cognizant of the auditor's concerns as well as your program interests.
Member Swank.
This may be for the auditor. So I'm looking at these numbers, which we're seeing now for the first time. In 2015, total revenue 957. 2019, the last year before COVID, because I know once we get to 2020, things change dramatically, 737. That's a reduction in revenue of 24%. That's a boatload of money. And part of voting for this resolution, I think, is exactly what Auditor Heck said. If we're not going to do it, why do it? So my question is, the 24% decline, why? In fact, it went down from 15 to 16, 16 to 17, 17 to 18, 18 to 19. 1, 2, 3, 4 years in a row, we had a significant decline in revenue. People quit stealing catalytic converters.
Please.
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer your question, but I also want to preface that part of what I tried to outline is I'm not looking at my perfect world, how courts are funded. That's something that in our earlier meetings I discussed this, and I said if we were to go all the way, then we could potentially restructure entirely and fund through the city instead of having this funded through court costs. But I don't think that we're there right now. That's why I tried to say at the very beginning, I listened to the concerns that were mentioned by others. I still, in a perfect world, I would not have a branch of government in any way funded through collection of court costs. I just don't think that charging the people that are coming in because they're charged makes sense as a way of raising revenue for the court. I understand realities, I understand the financial components, so I'm not looking at that, even though in my perfect world I would. Okay, so that's not what I'm proposing. I know that we discussed that if we were to go to the extreme, most progressive version of this. I just want to make that clear because I think we're getting sidetracked by a conversation about something that's not even being discussed. A lot of what you're seeing, Member Swank, is actually changes in police prioritization, specifically for traffic stops. And that has been a priority change. Started roughly in 2012. There was actually a presentation from Highway Patrol specifically addressing this, where they made a policy change within their organization that they were not going to write as many tickets. They'd spend more time with the individuals that they were stopping, effectively looking at drug interdiction. They've continued on that policy, and a lot of the reduction is going to come from traffic citations. And that was always, as far back as I've been able to see, where there was any revenue generation was from traffic. And that doesn't mean it covered the cost of the court, it's still a branch of the government. But when they changed those priorities, that reduced what money was coming in. But the court's not there to make money. It is a reality that there are costs to having the branch of government, and it's something that I'm not looking to make that balloon out of control, but I think there are a lot of ways that we can make this more equitable and to protect people that are coming in through the court system that are being impacted, not because of punishments that are intentionally imposed, but because of blanket costs that are imposed on them. And that's what I'm trying to address at this point.
Did we see a similar reduction in enforcement with the sheriff and then the city of Athens police?
I don't have specific numbers on those for traffic citations, but I don't see a lot of traffic citations for either of those, especially APD just doesn't really do a lot of traffic citations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Grace. So other elected officials or members of...
Thank you, Member Crowell. Just to chime in a tiny bit, I guess. Thank you for coming with this presentation, and also thank you, Auditor Heck, for having always the ever watchful eye on the finances of the city. And I just wanted to, the bare minimum, just go on record and say I'm 100% with the same idea of, ideally, there wouldn't be court costs for people that are, we don't want it to be funding itself. I don't want it to see the court as a business. It's an actual branch of government. That makes me feel icky. So I know personally I would be completely in support of finding a way to subsidize that cost through the city. And I'm sure that would take a lot of very creative accounting and a lot of overtime hours at the auditor's office. But I also recognize that we don't live in that perfect world. But I know that I'd be for that. So thank you.
Thank you, members of... Yes, please, Auditor.
I just want to comment quickly on something that was said about information coming at the last minute. I did that on purpose. I could have sent this out last week. We've actually been discussing this for weeks. I didn't really want everybody stewing over this and make it become only the money, but I feel like I have to point that out now. But yes, I actually had sent a few things to Sam and Chris and the mayor a couple weeks ago. But I didn't really just want to put this out there and have everybody looking at the numbers going, oh, because it isn't all about that, and I get it. But we're talking about a huge chunk of money for the city to have to subsidize here. And as you said, and I remember when that happened with the State Highway Patrol and their philosophy. But at the same time, our expenses have not gone down. Our revenue has gone down, but our expenses have not.
Thank you, Auditor. Member Grace, please.
Thank you. Very quickly, Member Call. And this is just a question for the auditor, a request for additional information. If on the numbers that you sent us, if you could include what the total of the court cost, what does that include? Is that including any fees for the jail, for the prosecutor's office, for the public defender's office, all of those things, or is it entirely municipal court? Because I know sometimes in budgeting, the cost for some of the public defender's office, that sometimes is included in cost for municipal court. So if you could send us a breakdown of what's included in those totals.
I can do that. And I actually looked at that because I have all the revenue and expense reports here. And I know that those are areas that the judges talked about in his budget, the public defenders and the law library, you could say. He hasn't felt that those should be in his budget anyway. Come to about $90,000 to $100,000 a year in expenses. So even if we subtracted that out as a true court expense, we're still talking, a good $300,000 that we're subsidizing plus, as opposed to $450,000 is really what I came up with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just wondered what was included.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I can send all kind of reports out, but that's why I tried to make it into a spreadsheet. But I can show you all the expenses and I can do detailed revenue.
Thank you, Auditor Heck. Any comments from the audience? Okay, I'm just going to wrap up by saying that we will see a resolution of support for applying for the cohort at this council next Monday. And as President Isley has described, there will be another process of investigating what actually happens. But there will be a resolution for support for this cohort program. Yes, Mayor Patterson.
Thank you, Councilman Crowell. I'll be quick, because it was kind of alluded to with the State Highway Patrol having a paradigm shift back in 2012. That wasn't the case for the city of Athens. So, we typically have 3 patrol officers cruising 11 square miles of city. And if they do, observe a traffic violation that is a citable offense, then they typically will pull the person over. Sometimes it's a warning, but most times, sometimes it's a warning, sometimes they're actually citing the person because of that infraction.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, we are moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is also regarding the court. As the auditor said, the judge sets his budget, and the chief deputy clerk has been rescored by Human Resources, and it is up to this body to decide if the deputy clerk of court receives retro pay back to January 2nd of 2022. Just for council's information, we did do 5 retro pays, approved 5 retro pays in 2021. The auditor has processed this raise, but the retro is up to council. Judge, since you're here, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you again. The only thing I would say is that the order to increase the pay was put through on January 10th. I wanted it to be retroactive at that point in time, but there was a desire to reclassify the position that slowed things down by about 3 months. And I'm just hoping that that does not mean that the employee loses out on that increased pay during that time period. And I believe, Auditor Heck, that the amount is $247.26 is what we're referencing for that back pay. And I'm just asking that that be covered.
Thank you, Judge. So that
If
is
there are questions, I can wait.
just under $250 of retro pay for the deputy clerk of court that this council will decide upon. Any questions for the judge or any other comments on this from the committee? Other members of council? Administration, auditor, citizens? Okay, thank you very much. Going on to our next item of, thank you for being here, Judge Grace. 2022 staffing, amending the staffing ordinance. We have a proposal from the auditor to combine some positions within her office. This would include removing the administrative assistant position from the staffing ordinance, and then it would be changing the account administrator 1 payroll title to executive administrator. Both the JQ and the job description are updated and approved by HR, and there's a new score for that position. And the auditor has sent us a whole description of the additional duties that the payroll administrator or the account administrator 1 has taken on because of the empty administrative assistant position. So this is a would result in an increase of $1 per hour to the current hourly rate of the account administrator 1 payroll position, which would become the executive administrator. So the current hourly rate of this position is $21.71, and it would increase to $22.71. Any questions or comments from the committee on this item? Yes, Member Eisner.
So the total number of employees then with the auditor would be reduced from 6 to 5?
No, it'd be from 7 to 6.
Okay. Yeah, you say, okay, yeah. So you have 6 employees.
I have 5 in me.
Okay, I'm just trying to interpret your first sentence then. My office to have 6 employees, okay.
Oh, sorry, that includes me.
Oh, all right.
Total of 6.
Well, you're the boss, you know.
So I don't have to.
Other questions from the committee, other members of council? Administration? Auditor, you want to speak to this? Only if you want to. Just, here's the opportunity. I don't want to miss you again. Okay, that's fine. Members of public?
Well, I will say
Going
this.
once,
Okay,
twice.
go.
We worked really hard on this and figuring out, the job description and the added duties and everything else that went along with this. And I think it's important that we establish this position, which is a title change. We have worked with the HR department all along, and the director did the scoring for us to support what we thought should happen. And so I just hope that you'll support this change in my office.
Thank you, Auditor. Okay, one other item under staffing changes. The city administration is recommending a change in the hourly pay range for the summer pool manager or the annual part-time pool manager. Those who have been in the city for a few years know that we've had some challenges with operating our swimming pool. And it is believed that a quality candidate is available at a higher hourly range. I believe the current range is $13 to $16 an hour, and the recommendation is to move that range to $16 to $20 an hour. Would the SSD like to speak to this?
I can speak to it. We've identified a candidate who actually agreed to take the position at $16 with the understanding that we would come to this body and ask for an increase in the range. Ultimately, the goal is to land on $18 an hour to get this person in the door. This particular candidate is a 9-month faculty member at Ohio University and has a significant amount of experience in recreation, aquatics, and management of young people. And there's a lot of young people that you manage as the pool manager, with lifeguards and concessions workers and gate workers and such at the pool. And we know that this year we really want the pool to function really well, because after a couple of years of pandemic and the challenges with lifeguards that we had last year, knowing that we're going into another year where there's a shortage of lifeguards nationwide, we think that this is an appropriate pay range to get a very high qualified candidate in the door. And the other thing I would ask is that if you would consider that the movement of this range also would consider, as quickly as possible passage as opposed to going all the way to the end, or if not, doing a retro back to the beginning of the period of time that we brought them in. We're going to start them here very soon. I signed the letter actually last week. So it is part-time because it's like a 5 to 6 month employee, but in the month of June, last end of May, beginning of June, beginning of July, the person's working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, because that's the time that you're really trying to make the pool work. So it's part-time insofar as it's not the whole year, but there's a lot of work when you're there for that time to start up the pool.
Thank you, Director Stone. Questions from council on the pool manager pay increase? Other members of council? Member Grace.
I'm just wondering for during those weeks or months when the pool manager might be working 60 hours a week, are those hours over 40 eligible for time and a half? Or is that part of the?
Historically, we've not done that, but we're permitted to. And in this instance, I think that it's appropriate.
Member Swank.
I had 3 questions, now I have 2. You covered one for us. That range of 16 to 20, we have pay bands. Is this considered a pay band?
It's not, because this is a part-time employee. And so if you look at the staffing ordinance, you've got all the various FTEs for the full-time employees, and then down in the bottom, it talks about part-time employees and identifies the various dollar amounts that are attributable to those part-time employees. So they're outside of that whole non-union pay study structure that have those various grades.
So you would not need to come back to this body at $18, which is 50% of the way through, okay?
No,
Good.
nothing like that.
And then the last question, you mentioned they had experience and all that. Do they have experience with mechanicals?
Not as much as this particular pool has. However, they've been into the mechanical room, walked through it with our building maintenance folks, and are up for the challenge. So the previous pools that they worked out were not quite as complicated as the Starship Enterprise down there on East 8th Street, but they do have experience with mechanicals in pools that are less complicated. The benefit that we have here in the city is we've got a good building maintenance team, a very good building maintenance team, a great rec maintenance team, and then also we've got a whole water department that runs pumps all over the city. So if it comes down to needing support internal to the city, that support is there to help them get up to speed, especially in those first critical 3 to 4 weeks.
Thank you.
Other comments from elected officials, auditor, members of the public? Okay, thank you. Moving on to that ends staffing, and we will move on to the next item, which is the Armory Rehabilitation, Project 313. I believe we have a final design from RVC Architects. Close to it, is that what you said?
Proposal.
Proposal, thank you. The city administration is looking for an appropriation of $165,000 from 580 TC 500, and an authorization for the service safety director to expend up to $250,000 for preliminary and final design.
And I can actually
Please.
make a couple corrections to that, because since our meeting on Tuesday that we had, Member Crowell, we went back and we looked at costs associated with project number 313 and have been attributed to project number 313 over the last really 4 years. And there's actually $109,000 that have been attributed to that. It was some repairs in 2017, actually, when we initiated the project. That was only $10,000 plus $49,000 for the purchase of windows, and then $49,000 for preliminary engineering, the hazardous material testing that we did, and a few other things on the front end. So that's $109,000 already committed. And then I'm asking for $165,000 more to be spent for a total of, appropriated for final design out of 580. So that's $274,000. But already has moved through council a $500,000 appropriation in the ARPA fund, 286 fund, that also will need to get captured in this overall authorization. So the overall authorization, rather than be $274,000, will be $774,000. And again, this is going towards our about $1 million commitment to the project. We do have an upcoming visit working on getting more funding from the outside. We've got the capital bill ask in right now. We had a great meeting with Jobs Ohio a couple weeks ago, and we'll come forward to you more in the future as we line up the rest of this capital stack to get this $3.5 million project, what we believe to be about a $3.5 million project, across the finish line, with the city contributing about $1 million of that. So this is 774 of the million or so we're looking at for the city's contribution to that effort.
Okay, thank you for that update. $774,000.
Total authorization.
Total authorization.
New appropriation, $165,000.
165, right. Questions from the committee on this for the Armory? Other members of council? City mayor or auditor, any comments on this? Members of the public? Thank you, Director Stone. Moving on to appropriations. The first item under appropriations is a request for $200,000 to the general fund auditor to cover our income tax refunds. We've heard a number of updates from the auditor's office on the income tax refunds, and this is an additional $200,000 appropriation. Any questions from the committee? Yes, Member Spionis.
Excuse me. Are we going to be done with another 200,000? I mean, where are we at right now?
Auditor, would you like to join us?
I'm starting to wonder, to be honest. We actually know that we have $115,000 in refunds that we haven't processed in our office with the voucher and sending the check out. And so that brings us down to, what, 150 or 54,000 now. Plus we put it in this other 200,000, but we've received another stack of refunds with the annual refunds that came in last week during tax time. And we've received another CD with refunds on it from our largest employer. So, yeah, I don't know. We just have no way to predict this, and obviously I thought it would be, there'd be an increase, but it's a lot more than I dreamed. I will say this is more for Member McCary. We did go ahead and send an email today to other entities to see what their refund status from their work from home. And my office is tracking the differences in the regular refunds and the work from home refunds that are a totally different ball game that we're in now. So I can follow up with that information too. We hope to get that from the other entities that we asked about. But as I said, we just sent that today, so we'll see, and I'll report when we get that. But
Thank
yeah,
you,
I'm not
Honor.
going to guarantee we won't need more come next October when extensions are due.
I know how difficult this is to track. We appreciate you.
Thanks.
Other questions? Yes, Member Swank.
The two are for the auditor. And I have to admit, I grossly underestimated this based on articles I read and the difficulty it would be to get this money back. It appears it's not very difficult, so my apologies for that first thing that it wouldn't be much. But I would like to know, if you happen to know this, the total number of refunds so far, ballpark figure, not the amount, but the actual refunds, and the percentage of those that are from Ohio University. Do you have any, is it too early to tell, or do you have that?
I just don't know offhand.
Okay, but I would love to have those figures.
We have those figures. We have separated that also, because obviously the majority come from
Well,
there.
the reason that's important, tomorrow from 1:30 to 2:30, we're meeting with the executive committee from Ohio University, and that would be a wonderful topic of conversation.
I'll make a note on that.
Thank
Follow
you.
up with you tomorrow.
Thanks.
Okay?
Other comments, city administration, public? Okay, next item under appropriation is $7,000 to the general fund, lands and buildings, for tool replacement. You may remember that we had a theft of tools from EPW, and this, with the insurance payment, this is the $7,000 to be appropriated back into the lands and buildings fund. Any questions from the committee on $7,000 to replace the stolen tools? Other members of council? City administration?
It's actually lands and buildings, so it's the rec maintenance building is where the lands and buildings folks, so it's not EPW.
Oh, it's not, okay.
There over the East State Street is where this particular theft occurred. And this is to reappropriate, and you mentioned an insurance payment that the city's received, it's just to put it back in their budget so they can buy these tools.
Thank you.
We've actually already bought them, but it
Right,
replaces them.
replacing. Okay, and the next item is $40. I like these amounts a little better than some of the other ones we've been doing. $40, this is to the Washington DRD fund, 596. I believe these are for county auditor fees. Any questions on this $40 appropriation? Other members of council, auditor, city administration? And the last item is a few miscellaneous items for arts, parks, and recreation. This includes some pump repairs, and I'm going to let the Director Stone speak to all of these at once, but pump repairs, some repairs that need to be done to the gym floor at the Athens Community Center, as well as the exercise studio floor, and then also lifeguard certifications. My question for Director Stone is if those pump repairs are in our brand-new pool, and was that expected?
Yes, they are, and no, it was not expected. But it's not, new is relative, right? It's you know, 5 years at this point.
Okay.
Perfect for warranty. What is the perfect warranty, right?
Yeah, that's right.
3 years is the warranty, and then it breaks in the beginning of the fourth year. The actual thing that we're looking for, we were able to fund those pump repairs out of some 273 funds, so we're okay there. But what I'm asking for is an $8,000 appropriation to TC 300 in the 270 fund, the rec fund, and that's specifically for a maintenance contract with Buckeye Aquatics to help us for, and this is just not something that we anticipated when we built the budget. Likewise, $2,500 for lifeguard pre-certifications. And so, you know, paying for, in past years, we've, you know, said, hey, you gotta be lifeguard certified when you can work here. And this year we've made the decision, we're not gonna do that because we wanna have enough lifeguards. And so, we're going ahead and hiring people and then certifying them. And so this is a cost that we're asking for. So that's $8,000 and 270 TC 500, and then that gym floor TC 300. The gym floor, it would be 271 TC 500. It's $8,500. We've not redone the gym floors for about 4 years now, and so they're due. This isn't like a complete sanding down and everything, but it's the, you know, removal and reapplication of that finish, that critical finish that's on the floor. And, you know, there's been a variety of pieces of tape and other things that have gone there in the interim that, you know, cause damage. And so this is something that we do, kind of an annual, it should be an annual maintenance type activity that we've kind of put off for a few years. And so we're asking to have an appropriation there.
Thank you, Director Stone. Questions from the committee? Members beyond this?
I'd like to ask about the gym floor. So, are we talking about the basketball courts at the community center?
Yes.
Okay.
And the fitness room, or the fitness studio.
Okay. The reason I ask is because I took the pickleball clinic this weekend and talked to Greg Lavelle, and he was concerned that the shiny floor makes it very hard to play pickleball on it. This is a real thing. Come on, it's a real thing. So what he had asked about, and I thought I'd at least ask, does it have to be shiny? Can it be more of a matte surface? I mean, this may seem like a trivial thing, but apparently for pickleball players, which there's more and more of, they have some concerns about that.
I'm not familiar with a matte finish that protects to the level that the high gloss finish protects to for other sports that are played in that facility. I do know that some of the damage caused to the floors above and beyond normal wear and tear has come from tape that's been installed expressly for pickleball that we're having to pull off now and redo that. I don't know that there's a different way that you can finish a gym floor with a more matte finish. I'll have to check into that. Certainly we want to ensure that the pickleball crowd is served to the best we can. This body did appropriate, or is seeking to appropriate, quite a bit of money to build 4 new courts outdoors for pickleball. But certainly, if there's a way that we can make it better for them indoors, we will attempt to do so.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Member Swank.
Well, wait for your committee first.
I think we're all done. Member Ziff? Member Swank.
I have to go back about 40 years. Got a little bit of experience with this. When I coached volleyball at Athens High School, girls' sports were just getting started. And we were not allowed to paint volleyball lines on the floor. It would ruin the appearance of the floor that the boys were playing basketball on. So we had to tape it. And you're right, Director Stone, it does cause problems. Before we get too, and there really was no difference between the gloss, semi-gloss, and the whatever finish. People like to have the shiniest floor possible. Another thing we need to consider, we're putting in new lights, which could totally change the dynamic of that. When you're playing pickleball, as opposed to other sports in a gym, your basketball, you're looking down the court, you're dribbling, but you're looking down the court. Pickleball, you're down here, very close, and you get that glare. This might be a golden opportunity, since we're going to screen that floor, and that's the process. We take all that off, to possibly repaint so that we minimize the necessity of putting tape down, we need to take an inventory of what sports are played on those courts and put the appropriate lines down. The painting first, and then the finish goes over the top. So that might be something to look forward to or look into, because that could very well change the $8,500 to a little bit more if we're doing more painting.
I agree. I mean, I would rather have the sports that are going to be played in that facility painted beforehand and then finished. To your question on the shiny finish, another benefit or another, the cleaning of the floor is important, particularly when there's a significant amount of body fluids that fall onto the floor, and so I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that a high gloss finish makes it easier to remove that versus a matte finish that maybe is a bit more permeable and a little bit more difficult to clean. But that said, I will check into a more matte finish.
Thank you, Director Stone. Other members of council, members of the public, elected officials, Mayor Patterson.
Councilmember Swank, I'm glad you brought up the lighting. That came up at staff this morning, and the new LED lighting is going to go in soon. I believe this weekend they're going to start working on that, or at least very soon. So to your point, looking at the lighting condition in there after getting the LED lights in, will be important to look at glare from the surface and anything else. I was at the Logan Chieftain Center for volleyball this past weekend, and they have all LED lighting, and it was amazing to see how lit up that place was with LED. It's a massive facility, but I think there's going to, from a lighting perspective, there's going to be a massive improvement within the community center, basketball courts, volleyball courts, pickleball courts in particular. We can look at the finish and see what's acceptable or not. I would agree with Director Stone, is that the ability to remove body fluids from that floor effectively, different finishes may affect that somewhat, but we can certainly see what best practices are out there and see what we can do.
Thank you, Mayor. President Isley, that completes Finance and Personnel. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Crowell. We'll now go to City and Safety Services Committee, and that's chaired by Councilmember McCary and joined by Councilmembers Grace, Swank, and Crowell.
Okay, good evening. We have just two items on our City and Safety Services Committee tonight. And those agenda items are both related to sewer projects, starting with project number 317 for City County Sewer Expansion. And I understand that this is an opportunity for us to make some helpful upgrades, and I'll turn to our City Safety Services Director.
Sure. So Project 317 and then ultimately Project 330, which is not on tonight's agenda but will be on a future agenda, are two related projects. And these are improvements, large improvements made to the city collection system to be able to take on the sewage that will come from the county sewer project that's currently under construction to the southwest portion of the city. That project and this body authorized an agreement with the county to take and treat the sewage, I think 5 years ago now. So this has been ongoing really, and the project has been ongoing since the end of the 1990s. Where we've been talking about this as a goal. One of the things that we're doing is taking advantage of the fact that we are borrowing through the EPA on what they call a regionalization loan, which is one-time money associated with a system regionalizing. And they're very good terms in order to promote the regionalization of sewer projects and sewer systems as opposed to a bunch of individual patchwork systems. In this case, it's 40 years at 0%. So it's you don't get financing like that, and so we're trying to do as much as we possibly can. So these numbers in the coming weeks are going to seem relatively large, but in the grand scheme of things, this is kind of a one shot at this money in order to do improvements that we're going to need to do to our system, regardless of whether or not we were taking on the county or not. So 317 project specifically allows for sewage to come across the southwest portion of the city, basically from the intersection of North Blackburn and Stagecoach Road, across the Ridges Tier 2 land, through the back of the Summit at Coates Run apartment complex, and then down to Dairy Lane, and then on into Richland Avenue, as well as come in from Elliotsville Road along Dairy Lane, and upsize the existing small sewer that serves Dairy Lane back where the dairy barn is and the 317 board is. So this is primarily a sewer project, but with the Dairy Lane portion, we're also going to seek an appropriation of money to build a water line on Dairy Lane. I think we talked previously that the city doesn't provide water service right now to Dairy Lane. It was already provided water service from LEAX when the city annexed that area back in 1990 or the early 1990s or so. And they've continued to serve water, and we're not able to provide fire protection adequately along Dairy Lane. So we've, for a number of years, wanted to build a water line to have a higher size line, or a larger size line that we could provide fire protection. So we're taking advantage of the fact that we're already doing a sewer project to put a water line in as well. And we're going to go ahead and do some pedestrian improvements really out to the city limits, or really out to, not necessarily the city limits, but at least to where the 317 board is as part of that project. So right now, all we're going to do is authorize me to advertise bids for construction and construction engineering, and we won't seek an appropriation until we get those bids. And that's a little different than other projects that we do, and it's a very specific process that the EPA requires as part of this financing. Once the bids come in, there'll be a resolution of tentative award, and then there's also be an ordinance to accept the easements, authorize construction and construction engineering, authorize me to award the bids and enter into the contracts for construction and construction engineering and appropriate those funds. So this is just to advertise. At that point, it's a special process for the EPA, and I'll get the remainder of those pieces of legislation probably a little bit later in the month of May.
That was extremely thorough. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from committee members? Councilmember Grace.
I'm very happy to hear about improvements to pedestrian access out Dairy Lane to the 317 board. How is that going to work at the bridge?
You know, it would probably be best for us to sit down outside of, a city council meeting and go over specifics on the project like that. This is primarily a utilities project. The pedestrian components are a real small portion of it, and exactly how we get across that bridge is something that we still have to sort out. I could show you on a map, and I'll do so, and then if you want to bring it to this committee in a future meeting, we can do that.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there were changes to the bridge included in the plan.
There's two bridges on Dairy Lane right now. There's the bridge that we did several years ago, and then there's a smaller bridge that's closer to the city. As it stands now, neither will have changes to it. We think we can work around it, particularly on the first one. But again, it would be better for me to show you on a map. Try to describe.
That's adequate.
Just for further clarification, the bids that the ordinance would be authorizing you to accept would cover both construction and engineering construction. Can you help me understand the difference between those two?
Yeah, so in smaller construction projects, we have our city staff does inspection of the project, and any type of engineering during construction, like maybe where there have to be a design change. For larger construction projects, we typically will hire a firm to monitor those, and then if there have to be changes or design changes along the way because of unanticipated things under the ground. Anytime you're working under the ground, you run into situations like, for instance, weak soils might have to have some redesign of an undercut or something along those lines, and that is typically what's included in a construction engineering contract.
Thank you. Councilmember Spink.
I want to make sure I understand this bid process correctly, because it sounds like it's the bidding that I'm most familiar with. And that is, in this case, you're going to put out there that we want to run sewer line or lines from point A to point B. We want to run water lines from point A to point B. Give us a price.
Yeah, functionally, yes.
As opposed to council has said, we're going to spend this much money, now bid on it. I mean, I'm simplifying this, but trying to draw a contrast here, because I much prefer the former rather than the latter. I think it gives you a much cleaner a bid.
We will still put an engineer's estimate. By law, we're required to have an engineer's opinion of probable cost, and then we're not allowed to award greater than 10% over what that engineer's opinion of probable cost is. So a contractor bidding will know, the dollar amount that we're allowed to award to. This project is probably in the $5 million range when everything's said and done, which will come from 750 fund, 740 fund, and probably either 220 or 572 fund for the transportation portion of it. The majority of that money will be through that 0% interest loan over the 40-year amortization period. And that loan would go into the 750 fund, the sewer fund specifically. For the water portion of it, we will not take a loan on. We'll use cash on hand in the unappropriated balance. Likewise for the street improvements as well. I just wasn't quite ready with the exact dollar amount to ask this week, but we do need to get started on the authorization to advertise and seek bids.
Other questions from committee members? Other council members? Audience? Anything else from the administration on that one? Okay.
The only other note on it is, like I said, the other half of this project, which basically upgrades the lift station at Richland Avenue and 682 and gets the force main underneath the river to hit the trunk line, and then also upgrades the lift station on Route 56, and then brings sewage into the city or further into the city across the river on that side of the city, and then down to the trunk line by Peden Stadium via force main is Project 330, and that's one that I will come and talk to you about here in an upcoming session as well. And that's probably the other half of this, which is probably another $5 million plus or minus. And again, it's all part of that regionalization loan that we'll be taking.
Thank you. We'll move on to the second item, wastewater treatment plant remote site telemetry improvements, Project 339. I understand that this is another opportunity for a technological upgrade that will bring us into kind of current trends with what kind of equipment is needed. And I'll just ask if our Safety Services Director has anything to add to that.
Sure. So we recently bid a project, and we had this was the second time we bid it. We had previously appropriated money and bid it, and we had a low bidder, and we sought to award it, and the low bidder backed out of it before we could award the project. Basically, determined that they couldn't do the work, so we rebid it. And what this project does is takes our telemetry system, and what our telemetry system is the supervisory controls and data acquisition system that runs the remote sites. So when we talk about the remote sites, we're talking about booster stations, lift stations, water towers, the various valves and pressure relief valves and in-ground reservoirs and things all around the city. And there's about 45 of them around the city that allows us to run the system. And they're controlled through a series of 800 megahertz radios that speak back to various controllers and then allow the operators working on duty at the plant to control things out in the system. Our system started in 1990, where we kind of moved into the system and have subsequently kept it together over the years. And we've been upgrading it over really the last 5 to 8 years. And this project allows us to untangle the water and wastewater side entirely. So we have a bid that we have money already appropriated for about $530,000 that's already in place. It was a good bid, and we're happy with it. In that bid, we bid 2 different alternates that would tackle a couple of the smaller lift stations that are out there and go ahead and upgrade those as well. There's not enough money in place to award those alternates, and so we're seeking an additional $235,000, since we do have good bids, to go ahead and award those alternates. And those lift stations, there's about 6 of them, and I could show you on the map where they are, but they're smaller ones that are kind of around the periphery of the city. And that'll allow us to get all of the lift stations on the sewer side on its own separate detangled telemetry system, and then all of the controllers and such inside the various stations upgraded.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Questions from other council members? Citizens, administration? I think this concludes our City and Safety Services Committee meeting.
Thanks, Councilmember McCary. We'll move on now to transportation, and that's chaired by Councilmember Reisner and joined by Councilmembers Grace, Ziff, and Swank.
Thank you, Madam President. The Transportation Committee has only 2 items. University Estates Bike Path Spur Project number 348 repair, and Ad Hoc Committee on Pedestrian Accessibility, which will be a presentation. So last week I met with our 2 city engineers, and we went over a very detailed presentation of the problem that's happened at the University Estates bicycle spur path, and the type of work that's going to be involved in order to repair not just the bicycle path itself, but also the slopes, and trying to mitigate the potential impact of that area slipping, which it is. My own background, believe it or not, I'm a geologist, at least that's what my master's degree says I am. And I've had a little bit of experience with this type of thing. Used to work with the EPA, worked on Libya for Gaddafi doing stuff like this. So The gist of what was coming down to it is just when you think something can't really be worse than what you heard it is, it certainly has the potential to be. So I'd like to ask the City Service Safety Director with his engineering expertise of what it's going to take to not only take care of the immediate repair, but any future problems to mitigate those.
Sure, thank you, Member Eisner. The University Estates continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. In the late 90s, when the area was annexed and that subdivision was at least initially envisioned, the City Council struck a development agreement and approved a development agreement. And one of the things that the Council approved at the time was that the city would build a bike path spur to the development and seek grants to do so, I think is what was in that original development agreement. And we did. So over a three-phase project, we built a section of bike path in, I want to say 2010, that got us across the river on the old railroad bridge. A few years after, acquired some land from the former Hope family and built the spur that goes past where Little Fish currently is now, and then subsequently built the last section a few years ago that goes on up to University Estates Boulevard and goes up the most difficult portion, which is up the hill. That slope has been disturbed previously, not only to build the water line that goes to University Estates, but also for the underground electric that runs up that ravine, for those of you who are familiar with the area. And so disturbed ground, coupled with the fact that there's some underground drainage issues and groundwater that continues to lubricate the failure plane, has caused a fairly significant slip to move there and to continue to move, which is common in southeastern Ohio. What we're seeking at this point is an appropriation of an additional $650,000 to do about three things. Number one, do a drilled pier retaining wall, which will allow us to arrest movement and protect both the path or the spur as well as the water line that serves that particular area. A drilled pier retaining wall is kind of a 100% solution that will guarantee that it won't continue to move. Not unlike what we've done in other places along roadways in the city. Some examples that come to mind are Grosvenor Street several years ago, if you're familiar with the section kind of in the middle of Grosvenor Street, as well as some older ones on Joneswood, on Sunset. If you take a look at those big I-beams that are drilled into the ground with lagging in between them. So that will keep both the path itself as well as the water line from moving any further. Addition to that, which will definitely be bid, we're going to seek $100,000, so $550,000 for that drill pier retaining wall, another $100,000 for some work that both the city staff will perform as well as direct contract without bidding for some improvements on both the upper slope above the path and the lower slope down near the creek to also arrest movement. And so I've got some cost estimates if anyone wants to get into the weeds on this, but we think this is the right answer. As much as I didn't want to do this, because I'm tired of spending money on that path, frankly. But we've built it, we're committed to continue to keep it in good shape and make it usable, and we also have to protect that water line. So that's what we're seeking.
Well, one of the things I got out of the conversations I had with the engineers was that it's just not the potential and real damage to the bicycle path, as important as that is, but if the slope continues to move, it will take the water line out and it'll take the electric lines out. And if that happens, then you really do have a serious problem. You're not just worried about people not being able to bike, now you're worried about people being able to actually drink water, flush the toilet, fire protection, electricity, and so on. And then add to that the fact that the slope is continuing to eat its way back up the hill and down again. So I really don't see how we have much choice on this. Other members of council, committee, Member Swain.
So I guess I've got Google Earth up here. I'm trying to figure out where you're talking about. Are we talking about this area right here? This right up here?
I can show you on. That's okay.
Here's those apartments.
Yeah, okay, so it's really
Is it this thing right here, down through here?
Okay, so, yeah, this is where's Little Fish?
Right, the little fish is right there.
Okay, so it's probably this.
Oh, down at the bottom.
No, wait a minute, no, that's not, I'm sorry, because it's on the other side.
So it's up here in this.
It's right there, yeah.
So is it, to your point, is it possible to separate the two?
Separate what?
It seems like a crazy place to put a bike path. To me, I would come down to University Estates, get down to the bottom where it's flat, come around this real flat area right
Right.
here where the trailer used to be. You're on Armory Road, boom, away you go. Would it be possible to separate the two? Make this the water project you're talking about. And looking at this, we're talking less than 100 yards of bike path we would need. If we come, if you go down University Estates, almost all the way to 682. Okay? And it gets real flat down there. You would cut across the, I don't know what, north, south, east, west, I don't see a thing on here. You would run parallel to 682. We don't want to dump people on 682. You run parallel to 682, takes you over to Armory's Road right there by that house when you first turn in going to Little Fish. Armory's Road right to the bike path and away you go.
So are you saying build a new bike path spur?
We're looking at 100 yards.
But that won't take care of the slippage problem.
It won't
No,
take-
but I'm saying, let's separate the two. Let's separate the two. I guess I need to go up there and look.
Yeah, I would recommend you, I'll take you on a tour of it, we can go look at it together.
You're
you know,
on.
To me, it's the critical infrastructure, it's that water line and the utility line. Regardless, we're gonna have to shore that up.
Right.
And this isn't, you know, something new to the city. You know, 2 years ago, we had to do the same thing on Columbia, where we had slippage taking place, and we had to put an engineered retaining wall, basically, shoring up of a sewer line that runs through that particular neighborhood. And that, I believe, cost close to $400,000 for that. And that was a run that was, as I recall, shorter than this particular location to make sure that we're preserving the water line that's servicing the University Estates. I hear what you're saying about an alternative way to get there, but I don't see that solving the problem with the underground utilities. That we've got to armor with something that is just constantly slipping. You know, I don't disagree with Director Stone's earlier comments. You know, we have put a lot of money into a lot of issues that we've experienced up there. We've experienced a lot of slippage that has occurred in waterline breaks right along the boulevard, University Boulevard, University Estates Boulevard. And we're going to continue to experience things like that. And unfortunately, it's just because of the soils that are up there on that project. But I'll
We'll take
personally take
a
you on a
look.
tour.
Yes, we'll take a, what do you call that, field trip.
Field trip.
Other members of transportation, questions? Okay. Other members of council, Member Spilman.
Well, when I live in University Estates Boulevard, as some of you know, and I was so excited when I moved in that we were going to have this great bike path. And we waited, and took a long time to build and everything, and it got built. And I was so excited. I went up and down there, and it was wonderful for about 2 months. And then it started falling apart. I mean, it was terrible. And now, I wish I had pictures. I thought of bringing some, but I thought maybe somebody had them. It's really a mess. I mean, it's very bad. It's getting worse seemingly by the day. There's a fence along there that's falling down. There's, exposed under earth, and it's dangerous. It's just flat out dangerous. So, I mean, I appreciate what Member Swank said, that it would really makes a lot of sense to move that to that other path that's already there, if that was possible. And then somehow just whatever we have to do to, protect the water line.
So did you propose to take the property, do a eminent domain action, take the property along 682 to go across, because that's private. I believe it's a company in California.
Well, if that's the case, we probably can't do that, but considering the enormous cost.
I think we're gonna have to do a drill pier retaining wall regardless to protect the water line. There's not a way that I can protect that water line without doing the drill pier retaining wall, unless we're gonna put the water line somewhere else. And then we're talking a several $1 million project probably. So unfortunately, we live in slippy terrain, and it's been disturbed a couple times with the installation of the electric line, with the installation of the water line, and now with the installation of the path. It also is the flattest grade to get to the point that it accesses University Estates Boulevard. University Estates Boulevard itself is actually steeper in portions prior to this. I know at the top of it, it gets a little bit steep, but looking at being able to try to cover, we try not to go more than 5%. Obviously, it is more than 5% because that's just the nature of that particular portion of the city to get up it. And so that was why a route was originally envisioned through that particular location. It's also city property. It's owned outright by the citizens of Athens.
Other questions from members of council? Other public officials? Citizens? Seeing none, we'll move on. Ad hoc committee on pedestrian accessibility. So I'm not going to guarantee that you're going to have as much time as the last presentation that we've had. But since I know you're in good shape from all that walking,
That's right.
you can get this thing done.
Thank you, Member Reisner.
Would you care to introduce yourself to council?
I can do that. My name is Diane Bouvier, and I know many of you, not all of you, but I used to work at the university, and I retired a couple years ago. And I am now chairing the Pedestrian Accessibility Committee. And you probably know that this committee was born of a resolution that passed in December last year under Arian Smedley. And we are the product of that resolution. So our committee, and everyone is here tonight, is Mayor Patterson, Rob DeLocke, I'm gonna blank. Yeah, thank you. Neil Ryan and Stephanie Hunter. So we have 5 official members and 1 unofficial member. And one of the things I wanted to comment on about the membership, this is our first time meeting with you, and part of the resolution is that we would meet with council 4 times. I think it's really interesting that there is representation from all the different groups, city administration, community members. I serve on the Disabilities Commission and the City Council and OU, and I think that actually speaks to part of what we're trying to do, and that is create a collaboration where we can come up with solutions around our sidewalks to make them more accessible. So I appreciate the structure that you've put in place for us to do that. And part of it is it's going to take a lot of talking with different departments and with City Council to make sure we put in something that can work. So thank you for doing that. Our first quarter focus, we've done a number of things, but in general, we've developed a process that we want to follow because we're supposed to have something in place by the end of the year. We've done a lot of research. We've read the reports on pedestrian and bicycles, the comprehensive plan. We've tried to look at relevant laws, both city, state, and federal. We've tried to look at what issues pedestrians have had that people have had in the past around building sidewalks. We've been collecting ideas from best practices around the country and internationally, thanks to Stephanie. We've been looking at safety and accessibility and what it is that makes good walkways. We've been looking at the GIS information that's available on our sidewalks, as well as what gaps there are, and trying to fill in the gaps. And we're going to be meeting with different people in the city staff. So we met with the engineers to talk about their operations, to learn a little bit more about ODOT and the ADA and how they work together. And so that's been our first quarter. And now I'm just going to pass this. So there are a few of us that are going to be speaking tonight, so I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues. Thank you for your attention. And Stephanie Hunter is going to be first.
Hello. So one of the first things we've discussed is who is a pedestrian. So everyone in Athens is a pedestrian because all of our trips out of home begin and end on foot. Pedestrians can roll in wheelchairs and strollers, use mobility devices such as walkers and canes. They can be a child on a tricycle or even an adult who doesn't feel comfortable riding their bicycle in the street. Every time we leave our homes, each one of us, if only for a moment, becomes a pedestrian. But in Athens, as in most of the United States, the places we walk have been neglected. The pedestrian sphere goes far beyond the sidewalks crumbling under our feet. True pedestrian infrastructure encompasses the entire three-dimensional sidewalk room. So, am I supposed to... There we go. The roadside, the building wall, the canopy, and the ground plane. And it includes things like shade trees, retaining walls, lamp posts, benches, trash cans, ramps, stairs, the roads we walk next to. If it touches the sidewalk, it's pedestrian infrastructure, just as the same as with roads, because that's what sidewalks are. They're just roads for people. Walking is the cheapest, most available, most reliable transport mode possible. It endangers no one. There's no such thing as a 3 pedestrian pileup. It's good for the air. It's good for the air, the ground, our physical and mental health. It's great for everyone's finances. Walkable cities build wealth and they build community. Whatever our age is, sidewalks are where we turn neighbors into friends. 30% of Americans do not drive, and they deserve dignity when they walk. All of us here need and deserve a safe, pleasant pedestrian infrastructure that takes us where we want to go. And we can do it. We just have to make it the priority it should be. Oh, there's another slide there. Darn it. Sorry, and next is Sylvain.
Okay. All right, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Diane. Okay, so as part of this, this is a draft of a vision statement. And a vision is essentially a commitment to the future, how we imagine what we'd like to see our sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure to be. So the City of Athens aspires to create and maintain complete environmentally responsible streetscapes that prioritize pedestrian safety, mobility, access, and dignity while fostering community connections in public spaces through allowing all people a full choice of transit modes. This is not a, done deal here. This is just our vision, and we need your feedback. The mission statement is essentially almost exactly the wording that we got from the resolution from R1421. So I'm not going to read that to you. You can look at it real quickly, and if you want to see the resolution, that's obviously easy to find. So I'll give you just a second to look at that. Okay. All right, these are the goals. And of course, these are abbreviated to put on a slide, so we have them, much bigger in another space. But essentially, we're trying to look at the law and historical and current documents. We're looking at community input. We're going to try to look at perhaps surveys and other ways of determining how the community feels about pedestrian shared path infrastructure issues, barriers, and solutions. Even things like, ice on the sidewalk, that comes up a lot, as you know. We want to prioritize and establish timelines and funding options for sidewalk infrastructure, upgrades, maintenance, and repairs. That was part of something very important that we heard from administration. And we want to recommend short and long-term strategies, policies, and guidelines. So, again, we need your input, and I'm going to move this along. Rob Delac.
I'm Rob Delac. I think you all know me. I've been here a bit. So part of what we've been trying to do is gather information about the current condition, what the current state is, and gather data about that. So one thing that I think is an interesting statistic is that Athens is a, quote, somewhat walkable city based on the walk score rating, which is the 4th best in the state of Ohio. Now, caveat on that is a couple of caveats. One is that there's not a lot of real competition for us honestly. And secondly, that score doesn't take in condition of the infrastructure. So they see that there's lots of sidewalks in Athens. People can walk to where they need to go. And so it's got a pretty decent rating because of that, but we do have a lot of work to do. The third highest walk commuting rate in the United States. This I didn't know until like a week ago myself. I didn't realize the statistic. Over about a third of Athens commutes by walking. I think Ithaca, New York was one that would rate a little higher than us, and I forget the other city, another big college town. So I think one thing to keep in mind here with that is that's not just students really. It is a lot of students clearly, but it's a lot of other people that are walking in the city too. And so equity is certainly an issue here that comes to mind that we need to be paying attention to here. And it's a good reason to be fixing our sidewalks and making it safe and easy to walk in our city. The mayor, I think, has a couple times said this statistic. There's like 105 linear miles of roadway. That's lane miles, right?
190.
190. See, I did that wrong.
One way.
190. So about 38 miles of linear sidewalk along those roads is approximately, that number is just slightly low, I think. And that's from the engineers' data they've collected. The other numbers here are numbers that I've gathered by mapping the data using OpenStreetMap to try and fill in some of the gaps and gather information about other things we didn't have any data on. Next slide. The first bullet here is the engineer's rating that was done in 2019 of the sidewalks. It's 38 miles of sidewalks in the city. You'll see that about 8% were poor. We don't know exactly the criteria they use yet. We've asked those kind of questions to hope to get some specific answers, but it seems like that is more or less that there's trip hazards. It's not a good place to walk even. Fair rating here seems to be that it's not necessarily accessible. So it's probably pretty walkable, but there are issues, maybe an inch gap on the sidewalk or something like that that makes it inaccessible for somebody with a wheelchair. So that's the initial sort of rough. About 25% of our sidewalks are inaccessible at this point. That number has got to be low, though, because it doesn't take into account other factors like slopes, cross slopes across the sidewalk for driveway aprons that makes many sidewalks inaccessible as well, and the lack of curb cuts in many places in the city as well. So there's certainly more than 24% that are actually impacted as and inaccessible. It only takes one break in the network to make it inaccessible. Otherwise, it could be perfect. One break and you can't get through. So one thing just to point out that we've found looking at the data closely is Ward 1, there's a couple things that stood out here that they have the most sidewalks in poor condition compared to the other wards, and also the most curb cuts that are older curb cuts that don't have a tactile grid and are not necessarily accessible, fully accessible, meeting ADA compliance standards, in other words. So Ward 1 definitely has older infrastructure and infrastructure that needs addressing at a greater rate than the other wards at this point. And that's just from some initial assessment here. So the current situation, like we mentioned, that walk score, 56 out of 100, that number doesn't sound very high, right? But again, we're fourth in the state. Somewhat walkable. One thing I like to say, and I'd like to encourage you all, you get to know things better as they go by slow, and you get to know your city better by walking it. So I really encourage you as council members to take the time to walk your wards. It's harder to walk the whole city if you're a citywide representative, but take that time when you have opportunities to walk the city. You really get to see what's going on, not just, and plus meet people and the social aspects as well, but seeing the infrastructure is certainly something that's, I think, helpful and educational here. And I'm not going to get into details here, just two quick sort of teaser images from some of the GIS data. So the one on the left is the city engineers. That's their assessment in a red, amber, green color so that you can easily see what is poor, very poor, fair, or good in this case. And there's curb ramps mapped there as well, the sidewalks. So there's a fair amount of data here available that they've created from 2019. The data on the right is data that's not just sidewalks, but it's focusing more on the crosswalks and curb cuts. and those are, and curves where they're missing. And that's data that I've been gathering using OpenStreetMap and mapping that. And the numbers I showed on the other slide, 770 curb ramps in the city that I've mapped. The engineers have done the kind of assessment they've done on like 550 or so of those. So they still have some to take care of as well, to catch up with. But there's a lot more detail here to look at, obviously. So next slide, I think is for Diane to come back up.
Yes. Thank you, Stephanie, Solvay, and Rob, and Neil too, who's been working with Rob on the GIS. So our next steps are to gather community input. So we're going to try to think about what it is that we're trying to ask the community before we ask for their input. And design and evaluate take the best practices we've had and try to think what might work in Athens. We want to look at what other cities have done to try to look at what kind of maintenance and replacement programs do they have, and are there any models that might work here? Or are there statutes that need to be changed in order for us to have a different kind of model to do it? Also, we want to evaluate some of the implementation that's been taking place with the Athens Bicycle Pedestrian Plan, because that also has some guidelines around this, if they have been. I mean, we're not even sure if it's been done. And our next progress report is August 8th. So at this point, since it was built in that we would come 4 times, part of it is for us to get feedback from you to see if we're on point, see if there are other things that you would like us to be thinking about, if we're off track, or any ideas that you might have. So we open the floor to you.
Thank you. That was a really good presentation. I'd like to have a copy of all that. I mean, it's not public
Sure.
domain, right? So.
Yeah, we can send the PowerPoint out.
Okay. Other members of committee? Member Swank.
One of the things in your very, very early slides dealt with existing sidewalks. And you could ask a million questions, but you've done a good job to date, and I'm looking forward to August 8th. But one of the questions I have, and this may be getting the cart before the horse, what impediments have you identified that have made our city a place where we have great sidewalks and then we have some Grand Canyons? What has kept those Grand Canyons from being improved?
I don't know that we have the answer to that yet.
Okay.
But we are trying to figure out, is there a way, it seems like when the city does a big project, they do a whole street project, all of the sidewalks get looked at, and the residents get assessed for fees, and things get paid for.
So to that point, have you delved into cost yet as one of those impediments?
We definitely know that it's one of the impediments, but we haven't figured out what are different options that might be in this city. So that's something that we're looking at.
We had a resident from Ward 4 point out a program that he was familiar with, I believe, in the Canton area, where when a sidewalk needs to be replaced, it's a shared expense between the city and the resident. And they supposedly, according to this resident, I haven't been to Canton to walk their sidewalks lately. Akron, yes, not Canton. But supposedly it had a tremendous impact on the improvement of their existing sidewalk structure.
Right. There are some cities that have been doing that. In fact, one of the things that I think is really interesting as we've been doing research is this has really become a hot topic in many cities across the country. So big and small cities are trying to figure out how do they fix old infrastructure that was put in place a long time ago, during a time maybe when the ADA had different regulations, and now the standard is better than it was in 1990. So part of it is we're trying to catch up, and many times the practice of just replacing sidewalks isn't automatically done. So we're trying to think of how can we strategically, as a city and community, make sidewalks a priority so we can receive the benefits from them.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor? Go for it.
To give Councilmember Swank a couple examples of the Grand Canyons here in the city of Athens. One, you saw that there was that one image showing ADA curb cuts that didn't exist, basically, and I'm speaking to East State Street and College. You know, we have a corner there with a rather large historic tree with its root structure, and we also have a very high curb. So there are challenges of the grading of some of these areas, and then we also have several locations where, in particular on the west side, where we have sidewalks that begin or end with steps. And again, a lot of it is due to the topography in that area. Not insurmountable to correct, but it's, you know, it's challenges that we see in some of the areas. So.
Live on a hill.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay. Yes, just real quick. So remember, the law does require certain things. And so one of the things that we have to be aware of is what the law says about who pays for it and how. And that can be different if it's a charter city and we're not. So we're exploring what's possible and under what circumstances we could possibly do a sharing. I don't know. Not sure about that yet. So we're just kind of exploring what's possible, and we don't want to make a statement that's not true. So we're going to hold back on some of these things until we feel very confident that we have an answer that's actually accurate. So.
Other members of the committee? Member Grace, Ziff? Other members of council? Is there anyone left in the audience that could ask a question? Madam President, go ahead.
Just make a comment and to thank you all for your time, because these people are volunteering, and it's taken a lot of time. And Councilmember Grace knows, you know, a committee forms or a commission forms, like the Affordable Housing Commission, and everybody gets together for the first time and says, and now what? So in a few short months, since they started meeting in January, I think they've done a really good job getting the background, the detail information, and knowing, you know, these differences and being conscious and aware of, you know, statutory versus the charter cities and what we face. And we're just, we will, I'm sure council members will look at the vision and the goal statements and get back with you on that. And we look forward to the August 8 update, and we'll hear more. Yeah. You'll hear more from us. We'll hear more from you.
Absolutely.
Yes. I just say one more thing?
Sure. You're a council member.
Yes, thank you. All right, so I want to make sure that we really do get feedback from you. I'm not sure how the best way to do that is. President Nisley, how do we make sure that we get some feedback?
I think one immediate follow-up would be to make the PowerPoint accessible so people can see your vision statement as you've developed it, and the goals in concert with that ordinance. And to ask folks to respond back once they receive the PowerPoint. And, you know, if you want a deadline by the next time you meet, that you know, would seem to be reasonable.
About the time after that time.
Maybe the next meeting after that.
And
So.
I think it's important to say that there has been a lot of effort over the years to improve our sidewalks. We've seen a lot of great things with our sidewalks. But again, to address what Member Swank said, there's a lot of really old sidewalks, and things have changed. And we have, you know, the topography is complicated. So, you know, we can't address everything, and people complain. But I think there's been a lot of good work done, and we just want to build on that and work closely with the administration to make sure that whatever solutions or recommendations that we have, that they are doable, and that the administration will agree that it's workable. So, and that we get good community input as
Does the committee have one contact person that council could then send our suggestions and so?
The chair, so feel free to send.
Okay, so you're going to give us your email, and we'll bombard you with all kinds of.
That works, yeah.
Okay, well, you asked for it.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes the Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Reisner, and that will conclude our meeting. We will have a business meeting next week, and I believe do we have a public hearing yet or not for the? CDBG, no. So it will be a regular business session next Monday night. Thank you very